The 2025 NFL wide receiver class is interesting. There's a whole lot up for debate. There's a couple studs at the top, which of course we will talk about in this video, but a lot of meat left on the bone behind them. Guys that are proven, who have some warts to their profile, guys that are unproven, who need to take a big step forward this year. We are going to tackle our top 10, top 12 wide receivers, plus some honorable mentions, plus some sleeper guys to break out this year. Basically, if you're wondering how good is the 2025 wide receiver class, you should get the answer in today's video. So should be a fun one. If you guys get some value from it, leave a like down below, comment down below any of your thoughts as well. I will be running these guys through the prospect model throughout this video, but I'm going to be making a dedicated prospect model video to put on Flock Fantasy. So if you guys want access to that video, that will be a site exclusive link down below in the description to sign up on Flock, 30% off 7-day free trial using the promo code FSE. But without further ado, let's get right into it. All right. So before we get into our actual top 10s / top 12s, because we do have some guys that you have in your top 10 that I don't, and then I have some guys that I have in my top 10 that you don't. So we'll probably cover like 12 wide receivers in this video. We do have to talk about Travis Hunter because he is a wide receiver cornerback hybrid. We are believing that he's going to play corner in the NFL. So we did not put him in our top 12s, our top 10 wide receiver rankings. The prospect model actually does like him as like a top 5 wide receiver in this class. When I watched him, I thought he had outstanding hands, great ball skills. Obviously, he's a tremendous athlete, so he's great after the catch. He's able to separate. Completely unrefined because he plays on the other side of the ball most of the time, and he's actually a better prospect at corner than he is at wide receiver. But if for whatever reason Travis Hunter decides to play wide receiver, he's definitely going to be an interesting prospect.
Yeah, if he decides he wants to play wide receiver, he'd be in contention to be a top 4 or 5 wide receiver in this class. I mean, the natural athleticism, number 1 overall recruit, obviously going to Jacksonville State a couple years ago. We saw what he was able to do at Colorado this year, potentially taking a step up here. Obviously, we know if he decides to play wide receiver, he should have a very productive year this year. That chemistry that he's built with Shedeur Sanders, man. Let's hope for fantasy circumstances that this guy is able to commit at wide receiver, because that would just boost up this class as a whole.
Yeah, I drafted him in our Devy draft because it's a best ball format. I was like, you know what? Even if he doesn't play wide receiver full time in the NFL, it's possible that he does. If he goes to like a creative offensive coordinator like the Rams or the Dolphins or something, maybe they'll use him on design touches or whatever, and I can get some best ball points from that perspective. But this dude does play wide receiver full time and commits to wide receiver full time. He legitimately could be a top 4, top 5, overall wide receiver and a first round caliber guy, because people have, talked about question marks about his durability and his size at corner. I don't think it would be as big of an issue at wide receiver personally.
I agree. And to be honest, flat out, I think he's a better wide receiver than he is a corner. Again, he's a really good corner in his own right. But I think if he were to commit to the wide receiver position, really develop his game as a receiver this year, I mean, we mentioned top 4 or 5. There's not out of the realm of possibility he could be a top 3 wide receiver in this class if he decided to commit to that end.
Yeah, it's difficult because if he does play corner, he's going to have some of the best ball skills a corner will ever have. Like, because he's actually that good at he has some of the best hands in this class at wide receiver, and he doesn't even play wide receiver full time. So he's a very interesting prospect. But let's get into our top 10s. And again, you have a couple guys in your top 10 that I don't. So go through your 10 through 6, and then we'll kind of jump to the guys that I don't have in my top 10 first, and then we'll do the same thing on mine, and then we'll go to the guys we have in common.
So in order from 10 to 6, I have it listed as Tory Horton, wide receiver, Colorado State, graded as a 75.0. Antwane Wells Jr., aka Juice Wells of the Ole Miss Rebels, coming in at 76.0. Ricky White, wide receiver of UNLV, coming in at 77.5. Tre Harris, wide receiver of the Ole Miss Rebels, coming in at 77.5. And Isaiah Bond, wide receiver of your Hook'em Horns, Texas Longhorns, coming in at a 79.0 grade.
Yeah, so let's start with Ricky White of UNLV, formerly of Michigan State. He did actually take 2021 off because he was suspended. It's not really been leaked exactly why he was suspended. I got some insight. It was team conduct or something detrimental to the team or whatever. I'm not sure if it's his fault. I'm not sure if it's the coaching staff's fault. Regardless, he goes to UNLV. He's going to be a 5-year player this year coming out in the NFL draft. Really only productive last year from like a raw, yardage and touchdown standpoint. He has an interesting profile. Let me know what made you put him in your top 10, because he is not in my top 10.
Yeah, so I just think he's a naturally talented player. We saw it as a true freshman sharing the field with guys like Jalen Naylor of the NFL. Obviously, Jayden Reed now, big-time breakout year in Green Bay. In 2020, he was a true freshman playing with those guys on the same field, was able to have a near 200-yard game versus Michigan, and we were able to see him fully put his traits, fully put his natural talent on display this year with that transfer to UNLV. I will say again, like you said, after 2020, everybody had their high expectations for Ricky White going into 2021. And for whatever reason, again, you typically see a true freshman that has a big time performance against a team like Michigan end up stepping up in their true sophomore year. But unfortunately, doesn't play in 2021, transfers to UNLV in 2022. I'm not going to lie, a big mid up and down type of year in 2022. But like you were kind of referencing, finally broke out this past season, 88 receptions, 1,483 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. And the notes that I have listed for Ricky White, again, the games that I watched, 2020 versus Michigan, 2023 versus Kansas, and 2023 versus Michigan. Strengths here. Talent is undeniable. Like I said, productive as a true freshman with NFLers on that same field. I thought he was a very clean route runner. Was watching him. Understands tempo, understands leverage, won on various double moves and across the second and third level of the field. He's a very, very good deep threat. He understands how to stack defenders, gives himself the best chance of coming down with big plays. Good footwork and release package at the line of scrimmage against press. Good athlete, fluid mover, and top end speed is above average. Some of the cons I have listed here, like you said, a little bit of legal issues. Don't really know exactly what happened in that 2021 campaign, but contract detrimental to the team. I don't know if it was on his end. I don't know if it was on the team end, but it is a big question mark nonetheless, at least until we see him fully get over those concerns in his final year in college this upcoming season. Charges were dropped, but of course he did lose a full season of development in 2021 and didn't really play like the same player in 2022. Inconsistent hands. I mean, that's the number one thing I noticed with him. He makes some really nice, highlight reel type of grabs, but for the most part, the consistency on a down-to-down, target-to-target basis isn't quite there for Ricky White. He's not the best yak threat despite the movement ability he brings to the table, and he's just got a really wonky profile as a whole. Again, from a pure ability standpoint, I feel like he could be a big riser because I really did find him being a talented player, good route runner, very, very good mover in space, but for the comp that I have listened to him, and it's funny because if you kind of contextualize this guy's 2023 campaign, big expectations, a little bit of, a wonky season as a whole, I think he can develop into a Calvin Ridley type of player where the hands aren't the biggest asset, but the route running, the fluidity in the open field are on full display. Again, I had him listed as a 77.5 grade, which would equate to a top 75 talent. I think he's the type of guy that can develop into a top 50, maybe even top 40 NFL draft pick should he build on this past season. But for now, I view him as more so a third round pick.
Yeah, I wrote small school Troy Franklin with a way worse analytical profile because I think Troy Franklin had similar, movement ability, had similar weaknesses, right? Play strength and, catch point fundamentals and that kind of thing. Good speed, good acceleration to beat defenses and kind of threaten vertically. You throw on a Ricky White highlight tape, literally every play is just a long touchdown. He stacks up very similar to like a De'Ami Brown, Traquan Smith in the model. So we're talking about a very similar, like third, fourth round caliber talent in terms of where he is right now. But again, maybe he takes another step forward. Maybe he commits to football a little bit better. I'm not exactly sure, like you said, what happened. But with Ricky White, I feel like the drop rate, the lack of contested catches, just 39% contested catch rate over his career, 10% drop rate as well. Like Troy Franklin, I just think that Franklin fell to round 4 with similar concerns, but Troy Franklin was an early declare, true junior, productive all 3 seasons with no analytical red flags as far as the suspension. So for me, I view this guy as somebody that the NFL will value as a day 3 player, which is why I put him down. I think he has some talent. I think maybe he has a Jermaine Burton type of rise like we saw this past year. He goes into the third round of the NFL draft. But to me, I think there's better receivers. That's where I'm at with Ricky White.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Again, I believe in the overall route running ability to be able to translate. Again, who knows, smaller school. The way he moves in the open field, like you said, you can tell that it's all a mental burden for him in the sense the concentration drops, the overall lapses in his game from a consistency standpoint. If he is just able to focus up and put it all together, I really do feel like he can end up being, a top 40 overall draft pick. So, but enough on Ricky White. We can go into basically, it's kind of funny because they're both listed, 6'1", 6'2", 190 pounds. But if Ricky White's like a big wild card in this class, It's kind of like Tory Horton's your vanilla ice cream. You kind of know exactly what you're going to get with Tory Horton. The strengths and weaknesses I have listed down for the record: 75.0 grade, top 75 overall talent. Barely cracks in as my 10 overall. I believe you said you had him at 11.
I'm at 12.
You have him at 12. Okay. So what I have listed down for Tory Horton, Colorado State, again, 6'2", 190 pounds, was able to watch his games versus Colorado this year in Boise State. Very twitchy and fluid as an after the catch player. Very, very experienced. You can tell that he has been a 4-year player. He knows the intricacies of the position. He knows how to settle in against zone coverage, really understand the middle of the field. And with Tory Horton, his hands, both in uncontested and contested situations, are an absolute asset. Like I said, very, very smart player. You can tell from experience that he knows how to read zone coverage, knows how to settle into these soft spots. Good production profile, good efficiency metrics. Again, just a very good fundamental football player. The problem that I have with him is I don't necessarily know what the ceiling is here. Again, in the Colorado game, for example, big time day, 16 catches, 140 yards, whatever the case was in terms of his bottom line. But if you actually watch that game, man, it's all drags, it's all screens, it's all slants. There's no real wide receiver work that he was doing in that game. He basically said, hey, I'm going to eat off coverage, and that's exactly what he did across the whole game. Route running as a whole, while solid, has room to improve to vault him up these ranks, in my opinion. No real reps or success against press coverage. Again, a wiry type of player. Notice when he was facing a physical corner, he kind of got knocked off of his spot. And the other issue that I have listed here is run blocking is a big-time issue at this point.
Yeah, so I wrote that Colorado State's motto was get Tory the fucking ball, because that's the only routes he ran, was get him the ball routes. Drag routes, curl routes. Again, there was the odd deep play, but he went 5 of 27 on deep targets this year. He caught 5 of 20. Again, that's a quarterback stat also. Maybe it's his quarterback play, but I don't know. I just don't see a nuanced, refined player for somebody who's going to be, 23 years old on draft night, coming from a small school. These are the types of players. It kind of also reminds me a little bit of your boy Jalen Tolbert as well, coming out of a small school where they're just not a refined player. My comp for him actually is Josh Reynolds from like a size and a play style standpoint. I think he has some nice flashes. Like you said, he's a good yards after catch player. He's kind of also a little bit like Malachi Corley in that way. So that we're talking all small school guys that get peppered targets who look good analytically because they, catch the ball a lot and they have good production. But when you pop in the tape, it's like, it's not really this guy's going up one-on-one and beating defenders. It's like he had a good game against Colorado. He had 16 catches for like 100 plus yards or whatever. It was, but he had like 5 ADOT in that game. Like they were just checking the ball down to him constantly.
It's actually hilarious. So I go into that game, I see the stat line. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to see Tory Horton, winning at all 3 levels of the field. And he just put it on. And I swear to God, like out of his 16 catches, it almost felt like 8 or 9 were on drag routes alone.
It's just like Malachi Corley's game against Ohio State. It's exactly like what Corley had in his profile. We're like, oh, look at this game against Ohio State. That's good. He's a small school guy performing against big schools. It's the game plan was get him the freaking ball. That was the game plan. Just get him the ball in his hands. He's an electric player in space, man. He had a punt return touchdown this year. He averaged like 16 yards per punt return. He's a good player, and he's an exciting like day 3 potential, like early day 3, late day 2 kind of wide receiver. But I think that's probably where his ceiling is, unless he takes a massive step from a nuance standpoint this year.
Same page. I have him barely on the cusp of a top 75 talent against 75.0. And that's specifically because once you actually run it through, 13 out of 15 analytical grade is going to prop him up a little bit. Like I said, mid-round 3 type of prospect is about where I see him at. So that would be the difference between wide receiver 10 where I have him, wide receiver 12 where you have him.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump over to the guys that I have, or I'll list my top 10 to 6 here. And then the guys that I have in my top 10 that you don't have in your top 10. At number 10, I have Jayden Higgins, wide receiver of Iowa State. I have him kind of, all these guys are top 75, top 100 players.
He's my 11.
What I wrote down here. So I have him at 10. I have Isaiah Bond, like you said, formerly of Alabama, now of my Texas Longhorns at 9. Antwane Wells, I have at number 8. Nic Anderson, wide receiver of Oklahoma, I have at number 7. And then Evan Stewart, wide receiver of Texas A&M, formerly now of Oregon. He transferred this year. I have at number 6. So talking about Jayden Higgins, I guess, first.
Yeah.
I look at Jayden Higgins, and he's the guy I watched most recently, so he's fresh on my mind. Big wide receiver, works really well downfield, and I think he has a great feel for the catch point. Unlike some of the big receivers in this class, I think he is very strong at the catch point. Just 3.4% drop rate over his career and over 50% on contested catches every single year. So this is a guy that knows how to win at the catch point. and has good athletic tools. I think when you get him the ball in his hands, he's not your typical 6'4", 210-pound wide receiver where you're just kind of hoping he could do anything after the catch. He actually is probably, I would categorize as like a weapon after the catch. Like his comps for me were somewhere between like Quentin Johnston is what I wrote down as my comp for him. But I also wrote down my draft crush darling this year, Jalen Coker, because I think he actually reminded me a lot of him as well. The yards after catch is really strong for a wide receiver of his size. And I do think there's some meat left on the bone for him to have good production this year. Because he only like 980 yards and like a bunch of touchdowns this year. I do think we could see the target share year this year, the year that he has 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns. They didn't really use him the same way that like Xavier Hutchinson was used at Iowa State, where they just like threw him into the slot and got him targets wherever they could. He was actually asked to play X wide receiver and kind of win on the outside, which I like to see. I just want to see him win more consistently this year.
Yeah, 100%. It's so funny that you mentioned, Quentin Johnson as one of your comps, because comp that I have listed here, and it's funny because it's just a player from this past draft class, but kind of like a Keon Coleman light in the sense that
Keon Coleman's a good one too. I think he's faster than Keon Coleman though. Like I think he's got, I mean, I would say as a holistic athlete, I think they're probably comparable, but I think that that Jayden Higgins might have like mid 4.5, low 4.5 type of speed, and at that size, that's going to play. Like you're going to get chugging along at that size.
100%. The reason why I have light though is that worst route runner, in my opinion, than Keon Coleman was. I thought Keon Coleman was a little bit better after the catch. Obviously, Keon Coleman versus press was unbeatable versus Jayden Higgins. He's not that quite type of player against press. Again, still very good. The strengths I have listed here: size, an incredible asset, 6'4", 210, and plays to it. You can tell this is a big wide receiver, is able to shield the DBs, is able to make those hands catches. Like he extends out of his frame like nobody else in this class. Again, 9 out of 10 in the hands department that I had him graded at. Again, hands, I mean, you may as well just lump into that another big-time asset for him. Plays to his sides and is able to finish these plays. Solid route runner in the short area of the field. Good after the catch for a big wide receiver. And the other thing I have listed here is that he's tough as nails. He'll make over-the-middle catches. He'll make downfield catches through contact. However, he is a big wide receiver. The weaknesses that I have here is that he struggles to separate in the second and third areas of the field, especially as a pure nuanced route runner. Again, big-time athlete, big-time physicality, is able to come down with those contested catches. Again, 10 out of 20, 50% rate in that regard, 112.7 passer rating when targeted. So he's just a really efficient overall receiver. Again, the big thing I want to see from him, like you kind of pointed to, is that the production profile as a whole, the target commanding ability as a whole, do increase in this upcoming year. But if you're just looking at the pure efficiency metrics, 86.6 PFF receiving grade, 3.00 yards per route run, 74.6 receiving grade versus man, 2.48 yards per route run versus man. And of course, again, I just mentioned how good he was as a yak receiver comparative to his side. The numbers back it up. 86.3 PFF receiving grade versus zone, 3.50 yards per route run versus zone. We saw what he was able to do in that big-time bowl game. I'm cautiously optimistic that by the next time we do this video, Jayden Higgins can be a top 7 overall wide receiver in both of our ranks.
Yeah, 9 for 214 and a touchdown against Memphis the last time we saw him on the field, too. The model likes Brian Edwards, Nico Collins, Terrace Marshall, Rashard Higgins as kind of like comps for him, and Jalen Coker, who I kind of mentioned as well, as somebody that he reminded me of. So, yeah, I mean, he's an interesting prospect. He's probably more of a, fringe day 3 guy, a guy that maybe you hope for 3rd round draft capital, but maybe more likely to go in round 4 at this current point in time. Again, if he takes a big step forward, that would obviously go a long way. But a guy that I would kind of label as like just somebody I'm excited about. I think he's an interesting player. And Nic Anderson, wide receiver from Oklahoma, is somebody that I'm very excited about. He's a guy that I think could be, and I literally, the first thing I wrote down was this year's Brian Thomas Jr., because I look at this guy and I think he has a similar skill set. He's 6'4", 215 pounds, rocked up dude. Oh, yeah. Like it basically looks like the Braylon Allen of wide receivers when you just watch how well built this guy is. When he runs, man, he eats up turf. He absolutely flies. He's a long strider. He's big. He's physical. 2.43 yards per route run this year as a redshirt freshman at Oklahoma. And he also had 800 yards and 10 touchdowns on his first real action in college football. He was redshirted last year, comes in, he's like 19 years old, has 800 yards and 10 touchdowns. And I think that this guy has Brian Thomas Jr., kind of Nico Collins-like upside. He ripped my burnt orange heart out with 15 seconds left against Texas to help Oklahoma win that game as well. Only ran the fourth most routes on Oklahoma. So there is so much more meat left on the bone for this guy to become the number one receiver here. And if he does declare for the draft this year, because there's also the big risk that Nic Anderson's a pretty young player. If he goes out and he has like another solid but not elite year this year, he goes back to school and he's in the 2026 class. But I look at him as, if he erupts this year, if he has 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns or something, he has a chance to be a legitimate first-round receiver. Like, it's not that he's just going to be a day two guy. He's being projected as like the 50th overall player on NFL mock draft database right now. So a guy that should go in like round 2, round 3. But if he has a big season this year, I could see a Brian Thomas Jr. kind of ascension there.
Yeah, no, I agree with your assessment of him. It's so funny that you said Brian Thomas, Nico Collins, because my comp quite literally is Nico Collins. And when you look at Nico Collins' prospect profile, especially at his time at Michigan, a lot of similarities, man. You know, about 30-something catches, 780 yards, big play type of threat. And obviously, we saw with Nico Collins, he didn't quite have that step-up year in college, which is why he fell to the 89th overall pick. I kind of have Nic Anderson graded about that level. Again, a late third type of player, top 100 type of player at this current point. But like you said, even though I have him right now as my wide receiver 12, I'm fully expecting by the time we redo this list, he will be much higher. Because like you said, I had to evaluate his whole body of work at this current point, which is why he lost some knocks. Again, the contested target to catch rate wasn't great, 3 for 12, despite being a big wide receiver. So his hands got dinged there. Don't think he's quite a nuanced route runner at this point of his development cycle. But when you're talking about the pros, like you said, after the catch, very, very fluid in space. Speed, acceleration, big time asset for this guy. This guy is a genuine athlete. Press coverage, he got an 8.5 out of 10. Again, a big wide receiver, some underrated footwork at the line of scrimmage. Again, I think he needs work overall as a route runner, but in terms of his off the line of scrimmage work, was pleasantly surprised for a player with as much raw tape as you can imagine. Like you said, 4th in routes on Oklahoma this year. He is not an experienced player. So that's what makes me excited for him, projecting him into 2024 once he gets wide receiver 1 overall routes to see how far he can rise. Again, I have him listed at Nico Collins. I wanted to put him inside my top 10, but generally speaking, when we're talking about like wide receiver 7 through 12, we're looking at 77.5, 77.5, 76, 75, 74. And then I have Nic Anderson right now at a 73.5. But that's combining, you know, the analytical profile along with the tape that I saw. Again, Nic Anderson, I think, like I said, with Jayden Higgins, they are my 2 big rises. So it's funny you already have them in your top 10 because they were right on the cusp for me at 11 and 12.
Yeah, it's weird. We took the different approach.
Yeah.
Like you were doing the projections on the running back rankings, and now I'm doing the projections on the wide receiver rankings. To give you guys a frame of reference, like Nic Anderson's run like 370 routes in his college career. Brian Thomas Jr., prior to this season, when he broke out in 2023, had ran over 500 routes and almost 600. So we're talking about a guy that is extremely raw and inexperienced, but that's what I thought about Brian Thomas Jr. And even in his 2023 tape, I thought that about him, and he had almost 1,000 routes under his belt. So I think that if Nic Anderson has a big year this year, he has a chance to be wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 in this class, legitimately.
Agreed.
And I do think if he doesn't have a big year in this year, he'll probably just go back to school. I don't even think he'll be in this class at all.
Yeah, no, he's definitely polarizing here in the sense that we expect the big year, but if he doesn't, I mean, I'm talking about him outside of the top 10 right now. If he has the year that would lend him as the wide receiver 12 in the class, there's no need for him to come out. Genuinely.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's only 19 years old, or at least he was on his tape last year. And Nic Anderson, you mentioned Nico Collins as your comp. I mentioned Nico Collins as well. Quite literally his exact comp in the model. So I do believe that if he goes in the like he's being mocked in like 44th overall, 50th overall. If he has a season that would put him in the second round of the NFL draft, he will 100% come out. And it means he probably went for like 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns or something, had like a 27% target share or whatever. So I feel really good about him. Like I said, he's my wide receiver 7 so far because I'm kind of projecting him to take that leap. The guys that we mentioned that we both have in our top 10s, we can get to now. I believe you said Isaiah Bond was in your top 10 as well. So let's talk about Isaiah Bond here. We have him wide receiver now of the Texas Longhorns, formerly of Alabama. I really liked what I saw with Isaiah Bond. It's funny. My comp for him actually was Jayden Reed. I thought that him and Jayden Reed shared a lot of similar kind of traits where you get this small, slight, jittery, open field wide receiver who's got great speed. I think he's faster than Jayden Reed, first of all.
Easily.
But he's like probably a 4.2 runner, and he's probably going to slide right into Xavier Worthy's role at Texas. And Ironically, they have very similar profiles too. If Isaiah Bond has like a monster year this year, then they would be kind of similar from that perspective, but only in reverse, because Xavier Worthy's best season was his freshman season, and then he kind of tapered off down the stretch of his career. So I don't know. What did you see in Bond? Because for me, I saw a guy that absolutely scorched man coverage, and that is really difficult to teach a receiver to do, even though he didn't have like great production this year with Jalen Milroe, and he was kind of a true freshman with Bryce Young. So you can't really, knock him too hard for being like, well, you should have produced better with Bryce Young. It's like, well, he was a true freshman. It's not like he was going to produce a huge number at that point in time. So for me with Bond, has a good chance to be the best receiver on Texas this year.
Yeah, so the comps I have listed here, it's actually so funny when you contextualize that. It's hard not to see like the poor man's Jalen Waddle in his game, obviously with the number, with the Alabama this year, with the types of plays, the type of movement ability he has. I have his comp kind of somewhere between like a Walmart Jalen Waddle and a twitchier John Brown in that sense, slighter wide receivers. With Isaiah Bond, again, the reason why I have him at 6 for the record, again, 6 through 9, very close to me, 79.0 versus I believe was a 77.5 at my 9 slot. With Isaiah Bond, I have him listed here again. Strengths, legit 4.3 plus speed. This guy is probably the fastest wide receiver in this class, straight up. Well-built frame for a finesse wide receiver. Typically, you see these speed, 4.2, 4.3 speed guys be listed at, 5'10", 170 pounds, or 5'11", 170 pounds. 5'11", 182. Again, he looks a lot bigger comparative to some of these slighter receivers we've seen back. But if he is actually 182 pounds, that's a very, very good positive in his regard. Extremely fluid and agile, not just a straight line runner. Again, obviously can win in the straight line, but I thought his overall movement ability is why I got the gist, why I got the sense of a, poor man's Jalen Waddle as one of my comps. Very, very good tracking the ball on either shoulder down the field. I mean, 7.5 out of 7.5 for downfield ability. When you're throwing this guy a deep target, most of the time, assuming it's not a contested situation, but to be honest, the actual contested situations he gets himself in are very, very little because he's just able to separate like nobody's business down the field compared to some of these wide receivers in this class. He's able to track it, like I said, either shoulder down the field, uses his movement ability well in yards after catch situations. The weaknesses I have listed here for him: route running technicality does need work. Again, I thought he was a very natural separator given his movement ability, but I want to see him develop as a nuanced route runner going into Texas this year. He's obviously very poor in contested situations. Again, very seldom he's in contested situations because he creates so much goddamn separation off of his movement ability. But when he is in contested situations, 1 out of 5 contested target to catch rate, 20% this year. Concerns with him beating press. Once you get a physical press man corner, similar to the concerns I had over Xavier Worthy, if somebody gets their hands on him, he's able to get knocked off of his line. And the other thing I have listed here kind of playing into that is that he just needs to improve his overall play strength. Too often in the contested situations, if he faces contact, he's losing the ball. Like I said, at the line of scrimmage, if he's facing press, he's getting knocked off his line. Again, a very talented overall player, and we saw what Texas was able to do developing wide receivers this past couple of years. Heck, again, 2 wide receivers this past year going in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft. I feel like if this offense is what we expect in Texas this year, Isaiah Bond, again, I have him at 6. I would not be shocked if he ends up developing into a top 4 or 5 guy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I got to see another University of Texas small receiver that's not going to catch the ball consistently. Probably that's the way I look at Isaiah Bond. It's like he's not. I don't think he's as good as Worthy. People are probably going to let their opinions go on Isaiah Bond based on how Worthy performs in the NFL. Like if Worthy's just a smashing success in the NFL, it's possible that Bond gets drafted higher. But at the same time, like Xavier Worthy to this point in his college career had 2 1,000-yard seasons and 2 seasons of over 25% target share. And Isaiah Bond hasn't had that type of production yet. So the production profile needs a big year this year, but you're kind of projecting that when he goes to Texas, there's not a whole lot of established targets there. He should be the number 1 receiver in my estimation in terms of an overall target share. It's just, I worry that he's not going to be any much better than like a Jayden Reed or somebody like, and Jayden Reed obviously hit in the NFL, but as a prospect, Jayden Reed was more of like a late 2nd round, early 3rd round type of talent. That's kind of how I view Isaiah Bond right now.
Yeah, although he's my wide receiver 6, I have him listed literally top 75 right now. So
yeah, I have him at 9 and I have him top 75 too. So the other guy I think that we mentioned, did you have Tre Harris just outside your top 5 as well?
Yeah, so Tre Harris actually came in as my 7.
Okay. And then Evan Stewart, you have in your top 5, I'm assuming.
Evan Stewart is 5 on the dot, which we'll get into in a second.
Okay.
The
So let's
other
talk
guy
about
we didn't
Harris because I
well,
have Harris
quickly,
at 5. You have him at 7. Let's talk about Tre Harris
and
first.
the other one we'll have to get into as well is Juice Wells. Is the one
Right.
we
Sorry.
haven't
Yes.
gone
Let's
over as
talk
well.
about Juice Wells first. Let's
Yeah.
go to Juice Wells. Antwane Wells, of course, did not play much at all this year. And as a result, Xavier Legette breaks out for South Carolina and becomes a first-round draft pick. Juice Wells, though, going into the year, was expected to be the guy. 6'1", 210 pounds, built really well, fills out his frame really well, solid but not great speed, but I do think he's a great after-the-catch player.
Yeah.
Tyler Johnson / Zay Jones is who the model likes, as well as kind of also play style wise. I think he fits that pretty well. Isaiah Bond, for what it's worth, too. KJ Hamler is his best comparable in the model right now. I think that Juice Wells is lacking a little bit of urgency and refinement on his routes right now.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like if you look at foot refinement and actual urgency to route running, those are the issues I have with him. But tempo, timing, and feel for a route runner, I think he's good at. So he's kind of just like all over the place as a route runner right now. He has great hands, great body control, good instincts as a run after the catch player. I think, like I said, he's a good athlete, but I don't think he's a super elite athlete. He's going to contribute as a yards after catch guy, but he's not going to be like a monster in that area.
You'll be jealous I came up with my comp for him for a second, but I have very similar notes. Moves well, even if he isn't the biggest burner. Open field fluidity on full display. Good, dependable hands. Solid intermediate route runner. Physical after the catch threat and good in contested situations. The weaknesses I have, struggles against press coverage. Hurt in 2023, transfers to Ole Miss this year. Had to have it as a knock on his profile. Second and third level route running does need work, especially as a overall, like you said, he does a lot of things well, but also doesn't do a lot of things well. It's kind of like a mixed bag in terms of his route running. Again, first level of the field, intermediate level, I feel like overall he's a good route runner, but once you get to the second and third level, that's when you start to see those issues flare. And overall, again, I hate to put this as a weakness, but what I had listed for him is he's kind of good across the board, but he doesn't have any real elite traits, is what I listed for.
I view him, if Tory Horton is vanilla ice cream, he's vanilla ice cream with sprinkles. Like he's a little bit better than vanilla ice cream, which makes me think that he's going to be a second or a third round NFL draft pick and probably somebody that come rookie draft time, because of all the good running backs in the class, if we get some quarterbacks emerging, he's going to go right in the mid second round of rookie drafts. That's exactly where he's going to go. And, Antwane Wells going in the range of like where Tyler Johnson went, where Chris Godwin went, where some of these guys that are popping for him as comps, Michael Thomas went in rookie drafts, is a good and a bad thing, because you can be a prospect who's good across the board and become Chris Godwin or Michael Thomas, but you can be a prospect who's good across the board and become David Bell as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think the biggest decipher there is if he meets the speed threshold, which again, he very well should, in my opinion. I thought he was a good athlete, not a elite one or a great one. Like he's probably about a low 4.5 type of guy if I were to kind of plan it out. I'm curious what comp you came up with, because I'm really happy with mine.
Tyler Johnson / Zay Jones is the one I stuck with.
Oh, okay, so you took the model one. Can you guess the 2024 class wide receiver I had him comp to? I think you can.
I'm trying to think. I'm blanking on everybody that was in the class. Is it Jalen Polk?
Yep. Yeah, you nailed it. He reminds me a lot of Jalen Polk. Again, I think Jalen Polk, obviously that big year, Washington this year, vaulted himself up to the 37th overall pick. Similar situation in the sense that Jalen Polk obviously playing to two other NFL wide receivers there with Rome Odunze, Elic McMillan. Again, he's not playing with two, but Juice Wells also sharing the field with Tre Harris, which we may as well just get into in a second as well. But sharing the field with Tre Harris, obviously potential NFL quarterback there with Jackson Dart, who, funny enough, I've heard people literally make the claim that he may just be this year's Michael Penix. If that happens, this Ole Miss offense as a whole ends up taking that step. I can see Juice Wells, instead of the top 75 talent I have him listed at, potentially go in the top 40 of the NFL draft if he stands up.
Yeah, I mean, this class, as I kind of talked about at the top of the video, is like there's proven guys with warts like Antwane Wells, and then there's projections like Nic Anderson. And we kind of just like went back and forth on two guys that are completely different. Like I think Juice Wells is like locked and loaded second or third round talent in the NFL draft. Like he's going to go in the top 75, top 100 picks, whereas Nic Anderson is like he could go in the first round if he hits, but he also could go day 3 or not even come out for the draft altogether.
100%. So I had him listed as a 76.0. Again, like I said, he ranked as my wide receiver 9. So of the guys we covered, Isaiah Bond 6, Ricky White 8, Juice Wells 9, Tory Horton 10. The only one I have not gotten into, and again, you said he actually made your top 5, was Tre Harris, correct?
Yeah, Tre Harris is at 5 for me. So you have him at 7. We could transition right into him because he is now a teammate of Juice Wells at Ole Miss there. very sure-handed, or not as sure-handed, sorry, as you would like, is what I wrote down here. Strong and sturdy build, guy who's great after the catch, great athlete, I think.
Great
Doesn't
athlete.
have any refinement to his game whatsoever. Doesn't know how to run routes. Man coverage, you tell him to run a vertical, he can run a vertical. Man coverage, you tell him to run a curl, he can run a curl, but he's not going to really do what you want him to do in the offense. His timing and his tempo is completely off, in my opinion. I noticed him and Dart and, stuff were off the same page a lot of the time. And I think he's fluid and he's elusive in the open field. I think he's strong at the catch point in terms of like physical strength, but I don't think his hands are strong, if that makes any sense.
I had the same type of issues. The strengths that I had listed for Tre Harris, again, listed 6'2", 205 pounds. Games I watched, 2023 versus Texas A&M, 2023 versus LSU, 2023 versus Arkansas. Supreme athlete and plays like he knows he's the best athlete on the field. It's kind of funny how he just bases everything off of, I'm more physically talented than you, so I'm going to make this play. You see that time and time again with Tre Harris. Strong ball winner. The flashes are incredible. Again, when he is putting his hands out there, coming down with these passes, he's able to make some big plays. But like you said, some of the concentration issues with his hands are why I only had it listed as an 8 out of 10. He's very tough to bring down in the open field. The ball carrier moves, the plays he makes behind his frame, he avoids tacklers extremely well. And the other thing I have listed here as a strength is that he's just a big play savant. Like, especially if you're playing Dynasty Fantasy Football best ball, he's the type of player you want, because he's the type of player that can make these 30, 40, 50-yard catches down the field, moss someone down the field, or flat out, if he's given an open leeway and he's running a little drag route, he can take it 30-plus yards after the catch. He is the type of player that on any single given target, on any single given touch, can make a big play happen. The weaknesses I have listed here: separation issues, needs improvement as a route runner, weak run blocker. Again, you would think for such a good athlete, for such a strong fundamental player, he would be a better run blocker than he is, but I did see that as a concern. Raw player currently relies on out-athleting his opposition rather than winning with nuance. Will be 23 by the NFL draft and way too boom bust at this current point. Game by game or even play by play, you kind of get a mixed bag.
Yeah, the model comps that come up for him, surprisingly, he grades pretty well. Even though he's expected, like you said, he's been 23 on draft night and stuff. Josh Doxson, Keon Coleman, and Quentin Johnston are the caliber of prospect that the model is spitting out here. And that is assuming that he goes top 50 in the NFL draft, which is where he's being mocked right now. I used his NFL mock database ADP, basically. So that's the kind of player we're talking about. I also think one thing I didn't get to mention was that he's kind of a linear athlete too. Like, I don't think he's the most laterally agile guy in the world, but he's a big guy.
He's
like,
good after the catch, though.
Yeah, he is. He is. I mean, like, as a route runner in terms of in and out breakers and that kind of thing. The comp that I have listed here for him is a faster Dontavian Wicks.
Interesting one. The comp that I had for him actually was a faster Michael Gallup.
That's interesting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, like, we're talking about a guy who we both think, I think he can run in the 4.4s. I mean, it's possible that he's kind of like this year's Xavier Legette, where like people are not excited about the profile, but they should be, honestly. It's not like he just has 1 year production. He has a good production profile. It's just that he's going to be older and he's not the most refined guy in the world. But if he does become a lot more refined on his film in 2024, then this could be a guy who goes in the first round. Like, he's got size, he's got speed, he's going to have production, he's going to have athleticism. Like, he's a guy that I could see the NFL liking more than the fantasy community, but it's not like the model dislikes him either. And this is obviously like built by the fantasy community here.
Yeah. I mean, you're part of the fantasy community, so there you go.
Yeah, well, and not to mention most of the metrics that are in it are metrics that people in the fantasy community use. So yeah, Tre Harris, he's a traits guy. He's the guy that you want to see take the next step as a nuanced player. And if NFL draft scouts are saying his film looks a lot better and he took a lot of steps, like, that's a good thing because his profile was already pretty solid.
Yeah, 100%. But we can move on to the next player, the guy that I have listed at 5. You have, I believe you said, listed at 6 overall, and that's going to be Evan Stewart, newly of the Oregon Ducks. So I'm curious. So obviously, again, we already just talked about Tre Harris. I have him at 7. So you have Tre Harris actually ahead of Evan Stewart, correct?
I do, and it's mainly because it's weird. I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite for a second here because I took the proven guy over the projections, even though I took some of the projections later with Nic Anderson and those type of dudes. I don't know. I think with Evan Stewart, I view that if he takes the next step, he's not going to be as high a ceiling as Tre Harris does if he takes the next step. So, I mean, it's probably bad process to want a 22-year-old to take the next step as opposed to the 20-year-old or whatever Evan Stewart is right now. But I just view Evan Stewart as a guy that we're going to nitpick regardless if he takes the next step or not, because he is undersized and he's a shifty, jittery dude. And he is super fun to watch on a highlight tape.
Very much.
But route in, route out consistency was an issue for me. Playing through contact was a massive issue. And for that reason, my comp for him is Xavier Worthy, because I think Xavier Worthy and him are both very fast. They're both good athletes. They're both good after the catch. They're both have this innate ability to know where a defender is when they're about to get hit and either throttle down and make the guy miss, or they're tough enough to absorb that hit. But they are what they are. They're undersized, fast wide receivers.
Yeah, you'll hear my comp for him in a second. And again, like, it kind of speaks to the toughness of his game, the ability to high point the football. I thought for a smaller receiver, 5'11", 174.
Excellent ball tracker.
Excellent ball tracker. I have listed here as strengths: extremely smooth and fluid mover, very, very good top speed. Not only very, very good top speed, we're talking about elite top speed, 4.3 level top speed. Hands are elite, will catch everything thrown his way despite a small frame. Flashes of extremely good route running, even if the consistency isn't quite there down to down. Toughness, willing to high point a football through traffic is what I noticed multiple times on his film, specifically in the Alabama game. The concerns I have: frame is a big time concern. Often struggles against physical press man coverage, lacks functional strength, can easily get pushed off the spot at times. Consistency as a route runner, again, the flash end, the high end looks very, very good. It's just the problem is that down to down, you don't know really what you're getting with Evan Stewart. And the final thing I have here is that he's quite literally a 0 as a run blocker, like straight up. Like, if you are running to his side, good luck. The cornerback is going to be able to get contained on you because Evan Stewart's not going to block him. The comp I have listed for him. Sorry, I was just going to say the comp that I had listed for him. Funny you mentioned Xavier Worthy. I saw a little bit of Jordan Addison in his game.
Yeah, Jordan Addison's not a bad one. I think he's a better athlete than Jordan Addison was. Yeah. That would be the difference that I would see between those two guys. But yeah, Stewart's a guy that could have a monster year this year. So again, if I'm playing the projection game in terms of like what, like, the NFL will probably like that he's going to go for 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns this year, because Oregon's going to lambast everybody on offense. Like, hey man, we're not going to talk about Tez Johnson in this video, spoiler alert, but he like would literally have just missed the cut as far as like, he's my wide receiver 11. You just had him outside of your 13. Top 10 as well. He's just the same kind of player as Evan Stewart, only he's older and even maybe a little smaller too, like a little less thickly built than Evan Stewart is.
A lot smaller. 160 pounds. Like, and the thing is, again, the big difference for me, again, I like Tez Johnson. I think he's going to be a solid contributing slot player in the NFL, but 5'11", 160, I think he's kind of more of a slot only type of projection at the next level. Again, you can talk about your comp in a second. I had a guy like Tez Johnson comp to a Jamison Crowder, where he could be a productive slot NFL wide receiver, but quite frankly, the ceiling for me just pales in comparison to some of the other guys here.
Yeah, I had Tutu Atwell / KJ Hamler written down, and those guys haven't traditionally translated well. Even they were great college players, and their prospect profiles are actually half decent. And the model likes Tutu Atwell the most for Tez Johnson. But back to Evan Stewart, like, he does have a very, very crazy movement ability. Like, that's the thing that he has as his calling card. Him and Isaiah Bond both are very good movers and can create natural separation as a result of that. But the challenging thing for Stewart versus Bond is that Stewart doesn't play as well through contact as Bond does, in my opinion.
Agreed.
But I do have Stewart higher. It's just because his profile is better. It's not necessarily that his film was like miles better.
Yeah, I agree. Like, for the record, I had Evan Stewart at 5, Isaiah Bond at 6. The difference being Evan Stewart at an 80.5, Isaiah Bond at a 79.0. So very, very close there. So what it sounds to me is that we have our exact top 4 probably in the exact order, if I were to take a guess right now.
We might. I mean, I have Stanford wide receiver Elic Ayomanor as my number 4. Yep. And he was a fun watch, man. So to give you guys an idea of how the context that you need to apply to his film is that he tore his ACL, his MCL, and his meniscus a year prior to last year. So we're talking about a guy who was a year removed from an ACL tear as a redshirt freshman, I believe. He'll be a redshirt sophomore this year. Big body, right? 6'2", 210 pounds to shield defenders. He absolutely knows how to use it. He has great speed for his size too. Really good speed. Open field, he was a menace. He went for, what did he go for? 294 yards and 3 touchdowns against Travis Hunter and Colorado. And he was up one-on-one man coverage.
Game-winning touchdown, he mossed him, no?
Hunter a lot in that game.
If I remember correctly, because again, that 2023 versus Colorado, 2023 versus Washington are the games I watched. I'm pretty sure the game-winning touchdown was him quite literally just pinning it to Travis Hunter's
He literally helmet caught on Travis Hunter's helmet to end the game.
Yeah.
And then the announcer yells out like, Ayomanor, mind your manners, like the cheesiest line of all time. But man, everybody in that stadium knew he was getting the ball on literally every single play. Like he had, I think, like 18 targets in that game. Like he was the whole off. He was the only reason they won. They were down like 28-0 at the half.
Yeah, no, that game was a lot of fun to watch. The notes I had listened down here for Elic Ayomanor. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you guys are,
I think it's Ayomanor is the name how you pronounce his last name, but yeah.
Yeah, if you guys are a Stanford fan, let us know in the comments. But I have listed here, fantastic hands, very, very powerful after the catch runner, athletic with a well-built frame, bully in the run game. We talked about some of these wide receivers just flat out don't want to block. This is the best run blocking receiver in the class, flat out. Good footwork and technique in his release package at the line of scrimmage. First-year player at Stanford, still so much room to grow. Like you said, a lot of context in his profile. We could be talking about a player that has a dominant 2024 campaign and really vaults himself up boards. And the other thing I have listed here, tough as nails, will make the tough catches through traffic across the middle of the field. The weaknesses I have listed here are separation ability does need work, oftentimes fails to separate at the second level of the field, lacks fluidity and decisiveness in his routes is what I noticed. And the other thing I have listed here is that he's volatile at this point. The high end is great, low end needs some work, but this could also be attributed to the lack of experience. Again, first time starter this year at Stanford. You're going to love the comp I had for him, but I'll let you take it away with your comp first.
Yeah, well, again, the context is that he blew his knee out the year before.
Exactly.
So that's the thing that I keep coming back to with him is that as the year went on, he got better and better. He was the type of guy that, you watch the early tape and you're like, he's got some technical issues and, he might not play every route the best that he does, but I noticed a lot of technical work against Travis Hunter specifically that he technicianed the shit out of him off the line of scrimmage. And I thought his release package was actually quite developed for a young player. And my comp for him is one of my favorite players in the NFL because he plays for my favorite team. He looks exactly like Chris Godwin to me, like exactly like Chris Godwin.
I actually, if I remember correctly, after I watched him, I literally sent you a Chris Godwin GIF. So I have the exact same
dude, he's exactly like Chris Godwin. I didn't even argue with you one bit. I'm like, this is exactly who he plays like. At first, I was like, is he like fast Michael Pittman Jr.? And I'm like, well, Chris Godwin's like a high 4.4 guy. Like he's exactly like Chris Godwin.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that is actually the perfect comp. So that's a lot of fun there. I think we can move on, though, because, we could just talk about Elic Ayomanor all day. We could talk about, potentially his rise. Again, we have him listed at 4. I feel like the general consensus isn't quite as high on him, but they will be after this year. We're talking about a first-year starter absolutely dominating at Stanford this past season. But
yeah, and also Canadian. So we got to shout that out. I drafted him in our Devy League. I actually have him in both of our Devy Leagues because I think that the NFL community is starting to catch up on him and they're going to realize that he is a legitimate top. Like I have him listed here as top 50 right now, top 25 with a great season this year. Like he could legitimately be a first round caliber receiver. As of right now, I think there's 3 first round caliber receivers in this class. And if you're wondering how good is this class, what's the upside for it? I think this class is worse than 2024's, but I think it's better than 2023's. It's probably as good as 2022. That's kind of the way that I aligned how this 2025 wide receiver class is at the current moment. But there is upside, like we said, for a Nic Anderson to break out, for some of these guys to make this class even better than it currently is. The number 3 receiver, I guess, for both of us is wide receiver of Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka, who had a completely throw the tape out year in 2023 because he was banged up all year. In 2022, he was outstanding. And he was, in my opinion, on track to be the second best wide receiver in the 2024 class prior to Malik Neighbors, of course, breaking out and Odunze's breakout and his injury. But press coverage, he performed really well against it. 92nd percentile versus single coverage for Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State as a true sophomore playing alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. He had over a 25% target share. So let's just start with that. That is a feat in and of itself. Yeah, he was playing with CJ Stroud, but commanding that level of targets with Marvin Harrison on the same field. He ran a 4.42 out of high school. He's a fluid route runner. Every time a DB opens his hips up, he's breaking off the route. Timing, tempo, decisiveness. He is one of the best route runners in this class for sure. He wins with athleticism after the catch. He wins with athleticism on his routes. He is exactly what you want a new school wide receiver to be. My comp for him here is bigger and more athletic Jordan Addison.
Interesting one. So the comp I had listed, for the record, games I watched 2023 versus Notre Dame, I actually charted for when I thought he was committing to the 2024 NFL draft. So I had the full charted notes there. The others I watched was 2022 versus my beloved Michigan Wolverines and 2022 versus Michigan State. Comp I had was actually DJ Moore. I saw a lot of DJ Moore in his game. Big explosive athlete. What I have listed down here is that he's a good road runner from various spots. Feel like he's got inside out versatility. You need to play power slot. He can do that for you. You need him to play on the outside. He could also do that for you. Can win vertical down the field, especially from the slot. We noticed that multiple times in that Notre Dame game specifically. Him being able to stretch to the third level from that slot wide receiver position. Versatile enough to be used out of the backfield and on design carries. He was used in influence motion a ton. Every single time they were running the ball inside between the tackles, you saw Emeka Egbuka as the motion player. A lot of attention was built towards stopping Emeka Egbuka because guess what? You try to overplay the inside run game. Emeka Egbuka is running a little flare screen and running it for 8+ yards after the catch. It almost seemed very, very consistent in that regard. Physical tackle breaker for his frame. Super nuanced at creating separation at the top of his route is what I noticed. The weaknesses I had him listed here for, need to see him adapt his routes to coverage a little bit more, especially against, middle field open versus middle field close. Want to see a little bit of that adaptation.
I thought he was an absolute technician.
We discussed that on the Flock Fantasy. So we did the Flock Fantasy site for the 2024 draft. That was one of the things that we disagreed with. It particularly showed up, in my opinion, in the 2023 game versus Notre Dame. Again, overall, very good route runner. But that's the little nuance I noticed in his game. Good, but not an elite athlete. And I think he's a very, very good athlete.
I'll disagree there too. I think he's going to be a 9.5 RAS dude. He was a 5-star high school recruit, and he ran 4.42 coming out of high school, and he's 6'2", 205 pounds. If he runs in the 4.4s again, and he jumps 38 inches like I think he's going to, he's going to be an outstanding athlete. I think people got the vanilla milkshake vibe on him at first, but the more I watch him, the more I just do not see that at all.
And maybe a part of that factor was the 2023 game against Notre Dame being a little bit banged up. That's why I probably had it listed there, but we'll see. If he looks closer to that 2022 film, like you said, I'm willing to call him an elite athlete, but I noticed more so a good to great athlete than an elite one. Again, I have the expectation he should be able to get back to that level because, like you said, he was playing hurt in 2023. Evidenced by the metrics. I mean, we're talking about a guy who in 2023 posted a 75.2 PFF receiving grade versus an 84.0 in 2022, 2.01 yards per route run in 2023 versus 3.01 in 2022, 76.9 receiving grade versus man in 2022. And then when you look at his other efficiency metrics, 2.66 yards per route run against man in 2022, 78.9 receiving game versus zone in 2022, and a 3.36 yards per route run versus zone in 2022. Ultimately, if we're getting healthy, Emeka Egbuka with that Ohio State supporting cast now, we already talked about a couple of his teammates in the backfield there with Quinshon Judkins and Trevion Henderson. We obviously know, highly acclaimed 5-star recruit Jeremiah Smith, Carnal Tate, who was a 5-star recruit last year, Brendan Innes, who was a 5-star recruit last year as well. If they get the adequate quarterback play that maybe they were missing from Kyle McCord in 2023, this has the opportunity to be the best offense in college football.
Yeah, I think hands down, it's the best offense in college football, in my opinion, assuming everybody stays healthy and Will Howard can play at a decent level. Like, Emeka Egbuka is a model darling here, by the way, too. He is sandwiched as a wide receiver 1 upside prospect who, I'll remind you, the hit rates hit a 60% rate as a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver and 100% rate to peak as a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. So we're talking about a really, really good hit rate. He is sandwiched in between A.J. Brown and Garrett Wilson is where he stacks up right now, including some of his 2023 numbers.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, if he can get back to that 2022 level play, people are going to forget about that 2023 season real quick.
Absolutely. So there is 2 clear studs in this class. And like I said, this class is better than people think at wide receiver. It is definitely better than people think because not only do you have vanilla milkshake, Antwane Wells, Tory Horton guys who are going to be solid day 2 caliber players, but there is upside for Nic Andersons and Jayden Higgins and Evan Stewart's and Isaiah Bonds and guys to take the next step at this level. But don't get it twisted. There is absolutely 2 studs in this class. And my number 2, I'm not sure if he's your number 2 or not, but Tetairoa McMillan, McMillan from Arizona is my number 2 wide receiver.
I wanted to put him 1. Trust me. I wanted to put him
1 too, but in my opinion, Luther Burden from Mizzou was the better player. So
more complete at this point.
Let's start with Tet McMillan, who has outstanding body control. absolute catch point master. This guy, I mean, I talked about some of the great hands in this class, even like Travis Hunter at the cornerback position having great hands, but Tet McMillan's hands are the best in this class. Long, rangy, 6'5", 210 pounds, like looks that big too. It doesn't look like he's listed that size. He looks that big. Difficult comp because this is a weird body style. Most guys that are this
a
tall
good comp for him
are not this light. So he's a little bit rangy, a little bit yards after the catch, kind of looks like a deer in the open field, but he's a great after the catch player for his size.
Absolutely. And once you hear my comp, you're going to be like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Who was a top 10 NFL pick just a couple years ago?
I guarantee it.
Drake London?
Drake London.
Drake fucking London. Let's go.
Yeah, Drake London. I think the spec catches, people talked about, oh, Drake London's not the best separator in the world. And, he doesn't have the most fluid athleticism in the world. But if you actually watched his tape, that just never added up to me. And that's exactly what I think people will say about Tet McMillan as well.
Yeah. They look at the size and they think, oh, yeah, he's just a big, stiff wide receiver that wins down the field. But what I had listed here for comps for the record, games I watched, 2023 versus USC, 2023 versus Arizona State, 2023 versus Oklahoma. Strengths, fluid mover despite being a taller wide receiver, like you said, navigates through traffic extremely well. He is, like you said, the best ball winner in this class. 50% contested catch rate, routinely attacks the ball outside of his frame. Again, he already has a 6'5", 210-pound frame. So the fact that he's even extending out past that frame, again, I didn't quite see Mike Evans because Mike Evans is just straight up
he's way stronger player. That's the difference.
Much stronger, much bigger, much more filled out player at this point. But I can see where they would come with that because of how good they are as ball winners. Like Tet McMillan has the opportunity to be a top 5 ball winner in the league as soon as he gets drafted. I really do see that type of upside. Good route runner for a bigger player. Compete level, dude just simply doesn't take any plays off. Dynamic X wide receiver that can function as the number 1 wide receiver in an offense. He eviscerates press coverage. And the other pro I have listed here, because we do have to jot this down, he outproduced an NFL draft pick in Jacob Cowing this past season as a true sophomore. That absolutely matters when projecting Tet McMillan going into the next level. The weakness is, again, he's 6'5", 210. I have to write this as a weakness, but realistically, the style of wide receiver you're getting when you're drafting him. Not a burner. Like, we don't, if he was a burner, he'd be Randy Moss, like straight up. Let's be real. Not the biggest asset after the catch. Again, he's a good wide receiver after the catch. He's good after the catch overall, but given the frame, you're not going to see, for example, we'll talk about Luther Burden in a sec. You're not going to see Luther Burden ability after the catch from a guy who's 6'5", 210. And he's much better at this point in his career defeating man than he is defeating zone, what I have listed down. And the numbers do back it up. 3.94 yards per route run versus man, only 2.52 versus zone. Still a good number versus zone, but 3.94 versus man is legitimately elite territory.
Yeah, and for those of you guys that are like, oh, whatever, Jacob Cowing was a day 3 pick. That's not that impressive that he outproduced him. Jacob Cowing in the FSC prospect model currently holds the highest best season target share per game numbers prior to Tet McMillan's presence at Arizona. In 2022, when Jacob Cowing was the dude there, and at UTEP as well, he was the dude, obviously, before he transferred, he was like a target machine. So the fact that Tet McMillan's outproducing a guy like that is absolutely absurd. And it's weird. So in the model right now, he is sandwiched in between Drake London and Romo Dunze. And I think if you took the body style of Drake London, he's a little bit more filled out than Tet McMillan is. You stretch him out a little bit, he becomes Tet McMillan. You compact him a little bit, he becomes Romo Dunze. Like that, they're the same. They have the same skill set. They're all better route runners than people think. Everybody thinks they can't separate. I will say 55 contested catch opportunities on 211 career targets is a lot. It means he's probably not commanding the level of separation that the next guy that we're going to talk about is commanding. But he is a great at the catch point separator, the way that Drake London is, the way that Jamar Chase is, the way that all these guys on the top of their route stem at the catch point, they create that little separation with late hands. They create that little separation with hand technique and with strength at the catch point. That is what Tet McMillan does well. Is he going to break ankles like Garrett Wilson? Probably not. But he is a good intermediate separator in the route phase at the line of scrimmage, and then he's an elite separator at the catch point.
Yeah. I think you nailed it completely spot on. Again, similar notes for this guy, exactly the same comp. Tet McMillan's a baller. And again, I do feel like he's got the highest ceiling in this class. Like, if we could talk about this in a year, he takes the next step up. Obviously, I mean, we'll get into Luther Burden in a second. I feel like his floor is the top 2 wide receiver going into the 2025 NFL draft. But Tet McMillan just figures out a lot of the nuanced parts of his game. Again, he's already so refined for a second-year player. But if he goes out there and he has a 115 catch, 1,700 yard, 15 touchdown year, which is in the range of outcomes. Arizona should be a very fun offense to watch this upcoming season. He could very much be the number 1 overall wide receiver. But for now, our number 1 consensus wide receiver, my number 1, your number 1. I mean, if you've made it this far and you've heard anything of the 2025 NFL draft, you'll figure that Luther Burden, wide receiver of Missouri, 5'11", 208 pounds, is our number 1 wide receiver combined.
Yeah, and lightning change of direction. That was the first thing I wrote down. He is, if you think like Malachi Corley is like a great yards after catch receiver, and he is, don't get me wrong. Luther Burden is just like the freak show amped up version of Malachi Corley, where just has an excellent feel for space. He attacks the ball super well in the air, uncovers versus zone coverage very well, versatile, today's NFL wide receiver. A smart coaching staff is going to have a field day with this dude, and he is physically imposing, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's like 5'11", 208 pounds or something like that. But he plays so much bigger than that. The way that he physically imposes himself on a defensive back, he accepts and invites contact is what I wrote down after the catch. Like, he wants to get hit and he wants to hit you.
Yeah, what I have listed here is absorbs contact and bounces off defenders with ease after the catch. Array of ball carrier moves combined with compact build to decimate in short game situations. You get a Mike McDaniel. You get a Kyle Shanahan. You get one of these nuanced offensive coordinators to set him up with yak ability or yak opportunity. Sorry. He's got the ability to be a legitimate number 1 caliber 10 target per game type of wide receiver. I really do see that being in the range of outcomes for his NFL projection. Dominant on quick in breakers. Also is a big time ball winner. Caught 56% of his contested targets in 2023. Attacks the ball with aggression. Mitts for hands, smaller frame, but extends out of it with ease when needed. Again, 9.5 out of 10 is the grade I gave him for his hands. Big play player. Even when everyone knew he was getting the ball, he delivered. Down the field, physical press man coverage. He is absolutely mossing kids at times. Like, it's straight up the ability to extend vertically, the ability to finish through contact. Again, we talked about, smaller wide receivers not being able to do this in this class. For a 208-pound wide receiver, again, good size, but usually the way he plays, you see out of 220, 225-pound dudes, there's a little bit of like Des Bryant element to his game in that sense that he's just straight up a physically taxing player to have to play against. The weaknesses I have listed here right now, 81.7% of his recorded snaps were in the slot in 2023. I really want to see that next step up, play a little bit more on the outside going into the 2024 class. Looked solid against press when asked, but like I said, just didn't really see it quite enough. 81.7, of course, being in the slot. Needs evolving as a route runner, some Mickey Mouse element to his current route tree, I noticed a little bit, and then want to see him improve his game-to-game consistency. No reason he can't lead college football in receiving for 2024. My comps list, so I have actually 2 comps. The comp list, the kind of how I have him right now, are one comp that I see him at currently, and a comp that I think if he takes the necessary steps can develop into. Can you guess the 2 players?
So it might be the 2 players that I have, because I wrote down 3 names. So the way that when he did run real routes, because the one thing I really want to push back on a little bit is that, he ran a little bit of a Mickey Mouse route tree, but when he did run real routes, he looked like a normal number 1 wide receiver to me. So for that, I was like, he kind of actually looks a little bit like Garrett Wilson, but bigger. The second one I wrote down that I think, people might think is blasphemy, but it is literally his comp in the model, is Jamar Chase. And then the third one that I wrote down that I actually settled on that I believe is the best comp for him is the second best wide receiver in the history of the model. He is the 5th best wide receiver, Luther Bird, in the history of the model. This is Malik Neighbors all over again.
So I have listed here, because I think Malik Neighbors got a little bit more juice, whereas Luther Burden has more physicality in his yards after catch game. The 2 I had for him is the current Deebo Samuel plus. The other one, what he could develop into, was literally Jamar Chase.
Yeah, and dude, so in the running back model, I mentioned that I adjusted it because we're grading sophomores and, guys who are underclassmen. I did not adjust the wide receiver model. I didn't put an extra percentage on these wide receivers because they're underclassmen. Dude, Luther Burden and Tet McMillan are top 7 wide receivers in the model with a year of college football left.
That's absurd, man. Like we're literally
And Egbuka's a top 12 receiver in the model. Of course, he was eligible this year, so it's a little bit Mickey Mouse for him, but he does still have a year of college football left.
what the gather you should take from this video is that, well, the general consensus is shitting on the wide receiver class this upcoming year. Again, they understand, the running back class is pretty good, the quarterback class is weak, and they think the wide receiver class is bad. Well, you should gather from this video, again, we talked about some absolute studs at the top, and we talked about a lot of upside guys that could potentially rise into top 4, top 5, top 6 options. What you should be learning from this is acquire 2025 picks, man. If people are thinking this class is going to suck because it's just not 2024, which, let's be honest, 90 to 95% classes are not going to look like 2024, that's when you can get value on the market. Again, 2025 draft picks, if you can get them, you're on the clock in the third round of your dynasty startup, and somebody's saying, hey, I'll offer you my 5th rounder plus a 2025 first. This class has the opportunity to really make those 2025 first value by the time that NFL draft comes.
Yeah, it's a bad year to need quarterbacks, but the early picks are going to be some really good wide receiver and running back prospects.
100%.
Yeah, it's like there's no Caleb Williams. There's no Drake May. There's probably not even a Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, or Bo Nix. Like, to be honest.
JJ McCarthy,
like,
man.
Yeah, or a JJ McCarthy. Like, we'll be lucky to get one JJ McCarthy caliber prospect in the quarterback class. Like, we'll be lucky to get one of those guys.
Agreed.
But yeah, wide receiver and running backs, man, this is the class to need flex positions. If you guys are building out a productive struggle right now, go get your quarterbacks in the startup and collect 2025 first, because you will be able to add a crap ton of running backs and wide receivers in this class. Wide receivers maybe at the top of the board, running backs throughout the depth position is a little bit better there. So I mentioned we didn't get to Tez Johnson. He was just outside of our top 12s there.
Baron Brown.
I also want to give... What's up, sorry?
Baron Brown, Dane Key, like they didn't make it either.
Yeah, and Squirrel White, also an interesting prospect as well. One guy that I want to shout out as somebody that I think could be a big breakout candidate this year is Elijah Surratt, who was at James Madison prior to this year, goes now to Indiana. So, Brock, if you're in the comments, I know you're a Hoosiers fan. I'm sure you're going to love the Elijah Surratt shout out. But he actually grades out as like a top 7 receiver in the model, even projecting that he goes like late day 3 in the NFL draft. So he is a guy that if he has a big year this year, he's also going to not be a non-power 5 receiver anymore, which will give him a better grade in the model. And also too, he has a chance to really take a step up in his game. He's got good size. He's got good speed. His numbers across the board. He's the best contested catch numbers in the class. So he's an interesting prospect to watch. He's not in my top 10 yet because I couldn't put him there. I couldn't really find a lot of film on him, to be honest, but he has a chance to really become a great player at Indiana this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. And I mean, Indiana has made some big changes, obviously bringing in Surratt. They ended up getting Curtis Rourke from Ohio, who didn't have a great 2023 campaign, but you saw in 2022, 25 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. People really talked about him potentially being as a NFL draft caliber quarterback in the 2024 class. So, I mean, Indiana could be one of the fun offenses that nobody really expects. And I think they're going to really surprise a lot of people going into this 2024 season.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned at the top of the video, we went through top 12-ish wide receivers in this class. A better class than people think. Not an elite class, not like 2024's, but it is probably as good as 2022. It's definitely better than 2023's wide receiver class. So very excited about this group. Again, leave a like down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. I will be doing a breakdown going in depth on the prospect model, a site exclusive vid for flockfantasy.com, running these 2025 receivers through the model. What happens if they get early draft capital? What happens if they get late draft capital? Who do they comp similarly and stylistically to? Again, I gave you guys a little teaser in this video. I go a little bit more in depth on that site exclusive video. So if you're interested in that, plus we're doing a big time update to our dynasty rankings, our startup rankings, our trade value chart today after we're done recording this. So head on over to flockfantasy.com, use the promo code FSE when you sign up. And when you sign up, you get 30% off. You get 7 days for free. If you sign up annually, you get a free annual review as well that we can break down your team. Danny's going to be recording a couple of them right now. So if you want to have a chance to have us look over your team and the rest of your league and how you stack up, we can definitely do that for you for free when you sign up as an annual Mother Flocker using the promo code FSE. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Link in the description. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.